Welcome to an exciting episode here, guys. Today we're doing V8 into 1M and we're getting rid of N54 out the door. Let's get into it. Alright, so behind me I've got a genuine 1M. We've seen on our channel before another white 1 Series S65 swap that we've done, but it was a retrofitted 1M kit. This time we're doing the real deal. So, bit of controversy, yes, okay. We're getting a genuine 1M, we're upsetting it by pulling the N54 OEM drivetrain out and we're putting one of these guys in. But there's a lot of pros and cons between both engines, so I'll run through them real quick. But before we start, let's come down and have a look at the engine bay that we're going to be working with. So we've pulled the N54 out, and as you can see, it's just a standard looking E8X chassis, or even the same as an E9X. So that means we can put in all the standard hardware, cross-member, engine box into this shell very easily. So why can we do that? Well, let's go have a look down on the ground here. So here we've got the stock N54 cross-member that's come out of the car. And although very similar to the V8 one, it's missing a few pieces. So if we look over to the right on our V8 crossmember, you'll see these wings that we've got here. So these are an extra bolt hole. It just gives the crossmember a little bit more support. But the reason that we're using this mostly is because the engine mounts here obviously suit the V8, whereas the engine mounts on the 6-cylinder are a little bit further back, and we can't just put the V8 onto that. So thankfully this bolts straight into the chassis of the 1M that's come out of the E92 M3, which makes this hardware conversion side of things very easy to do. So pros and cons of the engine. This is the S65 V8. I would say that the weights between these two engines are very similar. We are going to do a video soon and weigh a lot of the popular BMW engines to actually see what they weigh, fully dressed. The V8 is a shorter engine than the 6-cylinder, so that brings our weight a little bit further back into the bay, and it also spreads it side to side, which is what we want for handling. So that's one big advantage to the V8 over the N54. I would say the two most popular things about this engine over the other is this thing will rev to 8200 RPM standard, and I think the sound of a V8 is just, you can't beat it. The 6-cylinder is nice and smooth, and it's a reliable engine. They're always the smoothest combination of engine, a straight 6 compared to any other. But this engine makes 400 Newton meters of torque standard, whereas the N54, dressed as it is in the 1M, makes 450 Newton meters. That's because if you have a look around this side, I'm sure most of you already know, but those who don't, we've got a couple of little turbos on the exhaust side. So that's cylinders 1, 2 and 3 feeding a little turbo here. Cylinders 4, 5 and 6 feeding another turbo the same size. These feed into the intake's compressor and they join into a common pipe. So these turbos obviously add boost to the engine, and that's what brings that power level up. So these make, I think it was 250 kilowatts at the engine. The V8 makes 304 kilowatts at the engine. And most people who love these things say, well, why would you take an N54 out and put it into this and ruin it by putting an S65? Well, the only reason that they say it ruins it is, other than the purity factor, which, you know, it's still a BMW engine that bolts in, so I disregard that, is that these make a lot more power when you turn the boost up and tune them. But we can always overcome that by slinging a couple of turbos onto the side of that, and then it's kind of game over really, isn't it? So we're going to go the S65 again. We've done 4 of them in the past. None of these have been into a genuine 1M, but this time it will be. This configuration will be a 6-speed manual. So we've taken the manual box out of this car. We're going to put a manual box in from an E92 M3. We'll show you coupling it all together, throwing it onto the crossmember, preparing it to go into the engine. Into the engine bay. This engine's had a little bit of a birthday. We've done the rod bearings, we've done the sump gasket, rear main seal, we've done the valve cover gaskets, we've pulled it all apart, given it a clean and check over, changed all the appropriate seals and O-rings and gaskets where it's much easier to do out of the car. Yeah, so this is a special engine. It's one of our favourites. Little 4 litre, individual throttle bodies, quad cam. We've got variable cam timing control on both inlet and exhaust, both sides. And yeah, there's not really much else to say about it other than probably these guys here, which are, I think they're an Inconel metal. They're very, very light header. You can see they're quite messy the way that they appear on the engine, but they do work really, really well. So with a blower, these things can make nearly 400 kilowatts at the wheels without too much effort on a stock engine, but maybe one day we can see these things real potential and try and blow one up. This is the donor car that we've taken all the drivetrain out of. This was a 2012 model. This was a DCT transmission, although we've got plenty of manual gearboxes in stock, so we're converting this drivetrain over to a manual configuration for the 1M. But let's have a look at what it all came out of. You can see here's a very well stripped E93 M3, so it's the convertible. Yeah, you can see it's all pretty bare now. We've taken all the heat shields off, all the hoses for the AC and the heating, all the cooling lines. We've taken oil cooler lines out, even all the fuel line systems come out. It's all in a big pile over there in the shop. We're going to show you later that all going into the car. Even right down to this guy here. This is the vacuum pump. Because these engines run minimal valve lifted idle, they don't have much vacuum, so this little electric motor sucks air in to supply the booster with some braking assistance. It lives here on the M3, so we drilled out the spot welds. We've kept the bracket. We go as far as installing this inside the same area on the 1M. That'll all go in, pipes run, all the fuses and wiring to that, so even all that will work as it should. The car will think it's still an M3, except a lot lighter. Let's get this sucker in and we'll get the build moving along. Hopefully we'll have it ready for some road driving in maybe about a week and a half. We're not in a huge rush to do it. It doesn't take a lot of time, but all the wiring, coding, electronics is the most critical part. We don't want to overlook anything. We're going to have full functionality, so every button, light, feature of the car will work as it should. With BMW plugged into it, they'd probably be a little bit confused. However, the guys in Germany, I think, have built this car before but never released it to the public, and that is because this thing is everything an M3 is, except it's a lot lighter. So yeah, that's probably the biggest reason why people love this engine swapped into a 1 Series car. Alright, that's about it. Let's get started. V8 crossmember up on the table. We're going to give this thing some new engine mounts while we're at it. The other ones are a bit torn from the donor car and we'd replace them anyway. It's easy to do now. So these guys will just sit in there like that. And then the engine mounting brackets will sit there. There's the other guy here as well. So once we get this into the car, we'll be able to get to those bottom nuts, secure those. And that's ready for our engine to go onto the cradle. So let's get the fork in and throw it up. So this is our brand new clutch kit that we're putting on this setup. It's a twin plate setup, so it's quite a thin area of the compound that touches the friction plate and the flywheel. But if you look in here, you'll see there's a second plate. See a little bit there sticking out that floats. So there's actually two friction plates in here, and this engages on this plate, which makes them like one, and it simulates an aftermarket twin plate setup, but still on a dual mass flywheel. It's nice and comfortable and keeps any aggressive clutch out of it. Makes really nice smooth engagement of gears. And this is our clutch alignment tool. It is only plastic, so it's probably 95% accurate, so we still have to make sure it's nice and central and the weight's lifted. I'll show you that now. Alright, so you can see here I've got my clutches lined up with my plastic spigot. You can see it still floats around a little bit. If you look in the side over here, you'll see I'm spinning that, and you can see the two clutch plates spinning freely. That's because the diaphragm is not yet clamping on the flywheel. As soon as I remove this piece over here, I'll back this out, and that will release the spring, the fingers here, and that'll put tension on the plate. So we want to try and make sure this is fairly central. I'm lifting that a little bit so that when we put our gearbox on, the spigot will go straight into the spigot bearing in the back of the crank. So now we've got the engine and box all together on our engine table. So 6-speed manual gearbox from a M3. This was a DCT engine, so we had to change the flywheel, put a new clutch in, new release bearing, new spigot, and get all that lined up. So that's on. All the bolts are done up, all our harnesses in place and ready. We're bolted down on some new engine mounts onto our engine frame, and we've left it all pretty dressed. All our looms up here ready to adapt to the car. And we'll raise the car up now and put it in. So we're nearly lined up. This is the dowel on the chassis and this is the locator on the K-frame, so we're very much in line here. We'll lower the hoist the last little bit and hopefully she'll drop together nicely. Alright, so remember one of the differences on the subframe between the 1M and the V8 is we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 on each side that mount the 6-cylinder one into the chassis. The V8 one has a 5th one down here, which are these M10s, and the captive threads are present in the chassis, which makes it really easy to bolt this in. Alright guys, engine is in. We've got all the wiring that we need to do next. So we need to integrate the engine harness into the body harness and make everything work. We've got AC lines, there's some power steering lines down here to do, some emissions and other bits and bobs in the engine bay. All that cooling system needs to go in with fan. Down on the floor over here you can see we've got some coolers, we've got a tail shaft, some other trims and heat shields. We still need to finish putting all that back together. And over here we've got a table of bolts that we still need to find a home for. Sway bar. We'll have to put an exhaust system in this thing, which will be part of the M3, custom made into the rear 1M. And then we can start finalising wiring, fire it up, and hopefully bring you guys a nice juicy second episode showing this thing come to life and going for a test drive. Thanks for watching guys, and subscribe for some more good videos to come.